So I'm going to offer a few examples of searing moments to concretize and instantiate the practice. Before I do, let me offer a two-layered metaphor, which is something I've actually used in a little writing that we worked with when we explored into and sensed into the potential of searing moments. And so we're gonna be revealing our age through the through the metaphor, because I'm gonna talk about photography prior to digital cameras. And I don't know if you've had the opportunity, I certainly did have earlier in my life as a hobby, to step into the dark room, to develop the film, to then use that projection imprint machine, and then put the paper in a bucket with chemical fluids. And in that dark room, you see inside the bucket with chemical fluids, the figure begins to emerge on the paper. And I use this metaphor to propose the potential of searing moment, that in a searing moment we use a similar technology. The dark room in this case is the interior contemplative chamber of discovery of the meaning of your experience and what you choose to ascribe to it, and your capacity to stay with something that happened, such that in this case not the chemicals but the alchemical content of your soul and spirit compound and how they develop the content of your experience, they reveal a latent potential that perhaps was never revealed. So here is an example, okay? And then I'll come to the second layer of the metaphor. So this goes back to perhaps around age 8. Our family doctor tells my father that we need to go and see the heart specialist. And we travel to a hospital in Tel Aviv to visit with the heart specialist, and we enter on this winter morning those murky green corridors and wait there, and then enter the room, and I'm being told to take off my shirt because I'm going to have all these things, stickers on my chest, and I'm already shaking. First, I'm shaking because it's cold, and secondly, I'm shaking because I'm frightened that something is wrong with me. We are discovering after the test, when we go back into the room, and I'm speaking about it in the present tense because that's part of the idea of a searing moment, that the doctor has a concern, but he's not even looking at my eyes, not looking at me, he's looking at my father, and he's saying, your son has a mild condition and you need to watch over him. And in my mind, in my child mind, in my child eye, there is something gravely wrong with me, and I get frightened. And we catch the bus ride back to the kibbutz where we live. And there is this moment when it rains outside and I feel like everything is raining in me, and a moment occurs, that's a searing moment, that is coupled to the searing moment with the doctor, because what is arising in me is the spirit of defiance. And I turn around to my father and I say, you know, this is not going to be. I'm going to run free. In Hebrew, of course, so I don't know that it rhymed. But I was defiant that the message from the doctor was not going to shape my destiny. Within months, I started to pick long distance running, and 3-4 years later, I became the Israeli champion for long distance running for my age group at 12 and 13. And we went to see the doctor, that same doctor, a couple of years later, and the condition that was there disappeared. Unbeknown to me, I didn't know at the time that defiant spirit unlocked a healing process. So that was a searing moment that was locked in my childhood. But when I brought the updating content of that later, I sourced in it the spirit of defiance. That was something that I was able to unfold into the moment, such that I now know that there is a capacity in me to transfer to others the courage, the bravery to overcome frightening messages and scary moments, to melt, to thaw these experiences, because what happens is scary moments, they tend to freeze us in time. The idea of a searing moment is to release that potential, and once you release the potential, you actually unpack and unlock a tremendous healing permission in your own process, in your own experience. So now I'll put a second layer on the development of the black and white film in the darkroom, because now add to it the technology that appears later with digitized photography, where you now have actually the capacity, the permission to bring and add and change colors on the picture. And I propose that the fact that we have that technological evolution is simply an indication of that permission being released at a higher, this is the metaphysical view, if you like. The technology is a technological expression of a permission granted to the human mind, to the human spirit, in that we are given a self-authoring capacity. And I know that I'd be the first to admit that there is a below the line usage and application of that technology in the fake news, deep fake of people being able to create completely fake videos. Every new technology has a below the line, undesired, dysfunctional, potentially depressing and degenerative application, but also a higher permission. In the metaphor I use here, think of the technology of adding and changing and composing colors as the permission we have to take something that happened and unlock in it greater significance. So I've come to a second moment. This happens when I'm a young pilot in the Air Force, the Israeli Air Force, and the Air Force is playing War Games Day, and I'm discovering that even though I'm very young, I'm scheduled in the formation of my wing unit to fly in the formation that will represent our wing. And we go through the brief, and then an hour and a half later, there is a wire that comes down that there was an accident. And we quickly find out that somebody crashed. And we quickly find out which unit it was and who it was. And I quickly come to realize that this was my chief instructor in an earlier phase, as I was just graduating in a fighter pilot course. And I feel like a sharp knife has just gone straight into my stomach, like all the air is taken out of me. And I'm physically shaken, but the Air Force has a bit of a bravado culture, at least back then. I think it has evolved since then. You're not supposed to, back then, show that degree of vulnerability. So I find a hidden moment, I literally, physically throw up, because that's what that piece of news caused in me. But the show must go on. I'm a young man and I have to play the macho game. So I didn't want to go to the cockpit that day. a machine I learned to admire and love just betrayed somebody I admired who was definitely 100 times a better pilot than me. What are the chances that I will come back alive from this next flight? So I suppressed the feeling for many, many years until I started to engage more consciously with the practice of searing moments. And I traveled back to that moment and I changed the end of the story, not the end of his crash. But I've now shared this story and the teachable moral of the story, because when I tell the story, and I share this with executive teams and groups all around the world for the last 15, 20 years, and as a way of bringing them into what in the corporate arena I've been calling for years, centering moments, which has the idea of searing moments, just in the way the searing moments technology evolved recently, it has taken greater depth that we are now exploring. And when I share the story, I communicate the teaching that he transferred to me by once failing to follow his own brief, because he used to always, in the briefing room, say the following: stay within the comfort zone of the practice envelope. You don't need to fly lower. You don't need to push outside the practice envelope. And he got competitive for a moment and failed to follow his own brief, failed to practice what he preached. And it cost him everything. Young, beautiful life, lost like this. And I share, when I share the story, that I tell it to remind myself, because we fail every day. We're never perfect. We fall on our face and we pick ourselves up. But I try very hard, if I can, to walk my talk, practice what I preach to the best of my ability, never perfect. Because if you don't, it will, in a bad case, will cost you your reputation. In the worst case, it'll cost you your life. And now, I'll bring you to a third searing moment. I am sitting in a room with 12 other people and an inspirational teacher. And there is a lot that is unfolding and opening with great transformative teaching, transformational teaching. And I carry maybe 100, maybe 200 searing moments from inspirational, transformational moments of teaching coming alive. Here is one of them, because in that situation with 12 people in the room, there is a moment when the teacher explains that the human has a capacity to bring to life any feeling, any sentiment, any energy, any presence you can imagine in the entire universe inside your space, inside your energy field. You have that complete freedom. It's part of the self-authored freedom. What will you give credence to? What will you give permission to in your life, such that that becomes your signature? And he says the following. He says, I decided that I will not make space in my life for bitterness. Sure, I'm a human being. There will be moments that I will feel bitter, where something happens that is disappointing, and it's natural for a human to experience. But I will not allow that energy, decided, he said, when I was a young man, that I didn't want to allow that energy to occupy my space. Because I realized that if I would make my space, my energy space, and my life an ecology for bitterness, then nothing fine, nothing sweet, nothing very high and pristine will find that space to be attractive. And it matters not what happened in the next 5 or 6 hours of that conversation and that workshop and what happened the following day. I mean, it matters very much, but for all intents and purposes, for me, that was a moment that was sufficient for the price of admission, because there was a practical brief for my entire life. And I remember 16 years after that moment, that tells you the perspective, the time, I am traveling the Pacific Northwest. I'm looking to find different retreat centers and places to hold retreats. And I come upon a place, a bed and breakfast, and I get to talk to the owner of the place. And she tells me about the vision of the place and how she gave rise to it and what was the vision of what it will become. And then she goes into a story that narrates the tremendous pain and bitterness of her partner, her husband, that left her in the middle of the vision. And it feels to me, as she speaks about it, as though it happened 2 weeks ago, or maybe 9 months ago, maybe 18 months ago. And she continues the story. And when she ends the story, she reveals that it happened 32 years ago. And when she ended the story and we drove away from that place, I thought, wow, she stayed with that frozen moment for 32 years. She has all the justification, the pain and the disappointment and all that, but she did not unfold the potential of what occurred to a whole new level. She did not evolve that searing moment to a new script, to a new significance. And the teaching that I carried from that idea of never allow bitterness to preoccupy you and condition the totality of who you are, because so much is lost when you allow for that to happen, became active in me inside the interaction with her.